Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining Painting with Picasso's Grapevine. My name is Leanna Haun, and I'll be your host and teacher for today. Today, we are going to talk about supplies. So many people that are just starting out for the very first time walk into an art supply store and then look at the great aisle with just eyes glazed over. What do I start? What do I need? What do I pick? What if I pick the wrong item? So I'm going to try and give you some suggestions that'll kind of help you out and get you started on the road to artistic endeavors. So we're going to talk about starting off with the canvas. Pretty simple, straight piece of white canvas. This is a 16 by 20. The answer is pick a selection, a size that you feel comfortable with. This is kind of a standard size. You can get these very inexpensively in large groups. You could also start with a 9 by 12. There's many sizes to choose from, so you really can't go wrong. So don't sweat the canvas itself. The next thing that is really most confusing, and I hear a lot of questions from my students, are what kind of paintbrush should I use? So I'm going to kind of walk you through and talk about and can give you a description of the different types of paintbrushes out there. Again, you walk in the aisles and there are just so many paintbrushes. Some are very expensive, some are less expensive. The first one I'm going to talk about is the filbert. Now, you'll see they're numbered. Generally, a small number means a smaller size, so this is the number 1. And then a larger number, of course, is the opposite, a very large number 12 filbert. And I think this is something in between. Looks like a number 6, and they'll all be numbered. So this type of paintbrush really gives the artist the opportunity to give very broad strokes without tight lines. It's commonly used for backgrounds, and I'll kind of give you an example. The other supply item I always have on hand is water, because we are working with acrylics. And a dab rag, of course, because that's where I'm going to put my water so it doesn't drain down the canvas. So I'll start out with a little bit of paint that I have on my palette, and we'll talk to the paint a little bit later. Typically, I choose just simple paper plates because since we're using and working with acrylics, they tend to be a little runny, so you don't want them to run off the plate. That just kind of gives it a nice little lip. I'm just going to give you an example. So this gives a very broad, very nice stroke. You notice there's no tight lines across the side. It's intended to cover a very large area. So very nice. The medium one, again, gives you that similar stroke, but a smaller brand width. So you're working in a smaller area. So you grab something that has a nice rounded edge and work your way through the canvas. The next one is, of course, the small number 1 filbert. That's intended to do a little bit of detail. So you can use the very tip of it to draw. I like it because it can create a very wispy feel. So if you're trying to get the tips of the edge of a tree, most commonly grass. Grass, you want to be able to create those grains, those fine strains of grass growing up. So you need something that can be kind of a little bit thicker at the base and then can kind of fall off the canvas. Now, one caution item, you need to be very careful on how much pressure you put on your paintbrush. A tiny brush is very misleading. People think they're going to get a very small line automatically. If you press on that paintbrush, you're going to get a thick line. So a lot of practice will really kind of help you with your technique, with your style, as well as with your touch. The next series of paintbrushes I'll kind of speak to are the flats. So again, numbering system works very similar. Smallest one is smallest up to the largest, and I think this one is as well a number 12. Again, dipping into my water, always want to get your brush nice and moist first before you start. I'm going to show you the difference here and kind of put this right next to a comparable medium brush. So you notice the edges very tight. Now this is really nice and helpful if you're coloring in or painting in a smaller section that has really tightly defined lines. So I very commonly will turn the paintbrush to the side, use it like a pencil. So we're going to go along the edge, back and forth, and that way you can help get a nice fine line, as well as putting more paint on the paintbrush, going sideways, you can equally get a nice tight line. Similar effect really comes into play with the very large one. Same thing as the broad brush. You're going to get the same feeling, but just in a larger space. So you got a larger area to cover, but you still have some very tight outlines you want to remain within. So that's a good brush to use as well. Now you'll notice I keep on just dropping my paintbrushes back into the water. This is acrylics, and you don't have to worry about really changing up your water. Water's going to get brown, it's going to get dirty, but it's a good place to keep your brushes while you're working so that they don't dry out. And brush maintenance is important. So at the end of your painting session, always remember to wash them really nice, keep them very clean, and when you are drying them off and you no longer see any color coming out onto the paper, you know you've done a good job. Your brushes will stay nice and healthy. The next series we're going to talk about are the rounds. Now I've only brought a couple samples here. This is a much larger round, and I think this is again probably number 10, and then a number 1 as well. So very similar to that very small filbert, the number 1 really kind of gives you a similar effect. So you're not going to get too much of a difference from this style right here. So again, being able to kind of create those flowers, kind of creating the grains of grass. And then the large, also remember to dip it into the water, almost forgot there. The large will give you very similar to the filbert here, the medium filbert. The difference is really, it's a tighter brush. So as you are kind of getting a feel for your technique and your style, some people like working with a looser brush, which you'll find in the filberts, because the hairs are very longer, so it gives a much looser feel. This is a little bit tighter. So as I'm putting more paint on the canvas, I'm getting a much more stronger control. You won't use this for a lot of blending. This is when you're using it really to kind of just cover the color. And then the last series I brought with me, and I'm going to add a little bit more paint to my palette here, and then we'll talk a little bit later about paint, is the angled brushes. So we have an angled brush here. Again, this looks like to be about a size 4. Dipping it into the water. I'm just going to give you an example of that feel. Very similar to the flat brush because it's got the nice tight edges, but this is kind of something where maybe you have a long angled line and you want to work your way through. You see how it's coming through very nice and tight, just depending on how that line is driven. A lot of times you have a very tight corner. Let's give you an example of maybe an angled corner. And you want to really work through. This allows you to put the tip of that brush and kind of use it like a pencil again, getting right up into the corner and drawing down. So people get very anxious on, how am I going to get that tiny little piece? How do I get that tiny little piece of color on my paintbrush up into that section without messing up my lines? This is one of the brushes that you'll use. And you just draw down and then kind of blend out. So the one message that I want to really convey with brushes is you don't have to invest in something extremely expensive. You're going to see a large range of pricing on brushes. Start out with a nice selection, a nice introductory groups. You'll see them at any local store, any local arts and crafts. I get mine from Picasso's Grapevine, but there's many other places out there where you can get yours. Don't spend a lot of money. Start out light. See what you like. Get a play for them. Another thing that you're going to notice, any artist is going to have just 100 different brushes because you're always trying to get that new technique, that new feel, that style, something, an effect that you're looking for. So you'll find yourself investing in a different variety of brushes, of different tips, of different styles. The next thing I'm going to talk about is paint. So again, there's all kinds of different paints when you go into any kind of art store. Starting out, again, don't kill yourself with going right to the top of the line. You want to start out with something that, just to kind of give you an opportunity to really test and play, I recommend a light to medium body paint. So what does that mean? I brought, again, my paper blade here, and I'll kind of give you an example. So here is a very light body. So there's typical just craft level type of paints that when you pour them out, they come out fairly liquid. So they kind of drop to your paper plate very easily. as opposed to what I'll say is kind of the next level, a more medium body. This will kind of drop and have a little bit more thickness, and that's what I mean by medium body. It has just a little bit more thickness to it. So what's the difference, and why should I use one over the other? So the medium body really allows you the ability to cover things in one stroke. So if you are covering a large area and it's very solid, it's not a lot of blending, you definitely want to focus, do your paints on the medium body, because you don't want to have to go in there and do it over and over and over again. However, you may want a very translucent feel depending on the technique you're using. So for those cases, you would go with a very light body. The next question I typically get is, what colors should I start with? What should I have? So I brought with me today kind of a selection of a standard color palette that you would start with. Everybody needs white, and a lot of it. And the reason being is a lot of the colors that you paint with are very iridescent and are very translucent. So just by nature, regardless of their light body or medium body, they need something else mixed with them to make them solid on the canvas. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'll start out with my white. And of course, white is used most commonly in every painting. I don't think I've seen too many paintings that don't have white in them. And I'm going to pick, we'll start with actually yellow, cad yellow. This is a very light yellow. And I'll show you the difference on the canvas. If I start with the light yellow and I just do some strokes. Now, I don't know if you can see that very well, but it's very translucent, very white. If I take yellow, mix in just with a hair of white, what it does is give me a more solid feel. So you don't have to sacrifice the color just because you're using white. The reality is you just go back in with more yellow and deepen up the tone, but you're getting a nice covered feel. So if there is a drawing, perhaps you may start with a pencil drawing. So you want to be able to cover that. You're not going to be able to do that with just light yellow because it's translucent. You're going to have to add some kind of medium with it, typically white, to kind of give it a more solid feel. The other colors that we have in our standard startup palette is phthalo blue. We like to call it fat blue. It just has a real nice texture. Then we have naphthol red. Naphthol is your more brilliant red. You're going to be using this if you want to mix with yellow to get to your oranges. Everything here that I'm going to introduce you is kind of your basics for a reason. You can mix them to get to just about any color you want to achieve. The next one is burnt umber, and then of course black. Black is our basic, blacks and white. You're going to use a lot of black and white, so I'd always purchase extra of those two. And then the last two we'll kind of talk about here and just point out is alizarin crimson and yellow ochre. So alizarin is a little bit different from our naphthol red because it's a deeper red. So I very commonly use a lot of variations in red. Red is another one of those colors where it's very translucent. So mixing it with other colors is really going to help you cover your canvas. Then as well as yellow ochre, this is a very common color, more so than the yellow. You could get something close to this if you mixed cad yellow and your burnt umber together, but I use it a lot in my personal paintings, my personal choice, and of course you'll find your personal choice as well, so I include this very commonly. And our last one is our cad green. So kind of your basic setup, kind of gives you a feel for what you need to get started. So next week, come join us next time as we teach our students how to do different painting techniques. If you are interested in being a future guest on our show as either a guest artist or a guest student, for more information, send your email to info@picassosgrapevine.com. Thank you.